They said he died in the fire, yet 17 years later the same dog shows up on the same porch, lays his head down and waits again. But this time he isn't waiting for rescue. He's bringing back the truth. What happened that night wasn't an accident. It was erased, buried, and locked behind a name this dog refused to forget. This is the story of a memory that survived everything. If this opening struck something in you, give us a like, hit subscribe, and share where you're watching from in the comments. Let's uncover it together, one twist at a time. The rain was coming down in that way only a southern spring could manage. Thick, steady, and full of memories. Malik Carter gripped the steering wheel of his aging Silverado, eyes flicking between the slick road and the green blur of trees pressing in on both sides. Route 15 snaked through South Carolina's backcountry like a scar on the land. Familiar, uncomfortable, and full of ghosts. The GPS had nothing new to tell him. Turn left in 0.8 miles. The voice instructed, oblivious to the weight of what that left turn meant. He hadn't driven into his hometown of Morrow in over a decade. Not since the fire. Not since he buried his parents. Not since they told him Ranger was gone. The lawyers had called about the land, some zoning dispute, something about timber rights or oil speculation. Malik hadn't cared until they told him his mother had willed everything to him outright, and that the house, the shell of it, was still technically his. He didn't expect anything, just signatures and silence. But as he rounded the bend near the old Wainwright Bridge, his headlights caught movement. A lump of fur and bone lay curled on the side of the road, half in the ditch, half on gravel. At first he thought it was roadkill, maybe a deer or a stray mutt, but then it moved. Barely, just enough to raise its head and look into his eyes through the rain. Malik hit the brakes so hard the truck fishtailed slightly. He threw it into park, yanked the door open, and stepped into the storm without thinking. The rain was cold and soaked him in seconds. The dog didn't move, just stared, ears down, chest rising and falling in slow, labored rhythm. Hey, hey! Malik crouched low, trying to see better. The dog was a German Shepherd, big, though thinner than it should have been. Black and tan, with a torn ear and ribs that pressed against a matted coat. A classic southern stray if there ever was one. But something about the eyes, those eyes. Ranger, he whispered, barely audible over the rain. The dog flinched. A flicker, like hearing an old name in a dream. "Way," Malik muttered, stepping closer. The dog didn't retreat. He tilted his head slowly, carefully. Then his tail tapped the wet gravel once, then again. Malik's breath caught in his throat. "Ranger, is that really you?" A sound, a soft broken whine escaped from the dog's throat. Not just pain, recognition. A sound Malik hadn't heard in 17 years. Back then, Ranger had been a wild bolt of energy and loyalty. He was just a boy when the dog showed up at their porch, half-starved and unchipped. Malik's father, a carpenter with a soft spot for anything that refused to quit, built the pup a doghouse before sunset that day. They named him Ranger because he never stopped patrolling. Yard, woods, hallway, he was always watching, always there. And then the fire happened in the middle of the night. Malik had survived by chance, out at a sleepover, a last-minute invite. When he came home the next morning, it was ash. No one ever found Ranger. They assumed he died in the flames. Malik never saw the body. Now here was this dog, older, slower, but with the same eyes Malik had never been able to forget. He pulled off his rain jacket and wrapped it around the trembling body. Ranger didn't resist. Didn't even whimper. Just leaned his head against Malik's chest, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Like the past 17 years had just been an extended, cruel silence. Malik carried him to the truck, laid him across the passenger seat, then stood for a moment with his hand on the door, drenched and motionless. The world felt too loud, the rain, the wind, the sound of his heart trying to make sense of a miracle. In the truck, Ranger blinked slowly, eyes trained on the windshield. His breathing was shallow but steady. Malik turned the heat on full blast, watching steam rise from the jacket wrapped around the dog's. "You're going to get you looked at," he said softly. "We're not losing each other again." The motel near the edge of Morrow hadn't changed. Neon buzzed weakly in the rain. Malik paid cash, ignored the no pets policy, and carried Ranger into room 6, laying him on a towel near the heater. He spent an hour drying him off, cleaning his wounds, checking for ticks and cuts. Ranger didn't make a sound, just watched him, always watching. Malik finally sank into the edge of the bed and stared across the room. "You can't be him," he whispered. "You can't." But then Ranger lifted his paw, slow, deliberate, and rested it on Malik's foot. The kind of gesture you don't forget, the kind of bond that doesn't break. Later that night, Malik found an old photo on his phone. Blurry, sun-faded. Him, his dad, and Ranger in front of the old porch. He held it up to the dog. "I never stopped looking for you, you know that," he whispered. Ranger didn't respond, but his eyes stayed fixed on Malik's column, present. That night, as thunder rolled outside and the heater clicked quietly in the corner, Malik didn't sleep. He sat beside the dog and whispered stories he thought he'd buried. About his mom's peach cobbler, the time Ranger chased off a copperhead, how his dad used to hum when he built furniture. Ranger blinked, slow and solemn, like he remembered it all. The past wasn't behind him anymore, it had just been waiting. The next morning broke with pale light filtering through the thin motel curtains, cutting across the room like a memory. Malik hadn't slept much, but Ranger had curled tightly near the heater as if reclaiming warmth that had eluded him for years. Malik sat on the floor beside him, his back against the bed frame, eyes fixed on the rise and fall of Ranger's chest. The dog was breathing more evenly now, but every once in a while his legs twitched like he was still running in his dreams, or perhaps from them. Malik reached over and gently scratched behind Ranger's ear, his fingers moving automatically, guided by habit more than thought. That's when he felt it. A raised patch of skin just beneath the fur, tucked behind the dog's left ear. He leaned in, pushed aside the coarse black and tan hair, and there it was. A scar, faint but unmistakable, a small X. He froze. That scar wasn't random. Malik had been there when it happened. Ranger had gotten it chasing a raccoon through barbed wire behind the Carter property line. It had bled badly. His father had taken him to the vet, scolded him all the way home, but later that night he carved a tiny notch into the side of Ranger's collar with his pocket knife to remember. "So we never forget how stubborn you are," he'd said, laughing as he handed Malik the collar to hold. And now, here it was. The scar was still there. Time hadn't erased it. Malik whispered under his breath. Ranger stirred slightly, eyes blinking open. He didn't lift his head, but he shifted closer, pressing his weight into Malik's thigh like a child nudging toward a parent's comfort. Malik gently traced the scar again, heart pounding. "How are you alive?" he murmured. "Where the hell have you been?" His eyes drifted down to the collar. It wasn't the old leather one Ranger used to wear. This one was newer, thicker, warm but industrial looking. As he examined it, his fingers felt something metallic beneath the layers of grime and dried mud. A small rectangular tag. Not a name tag, something else. He unfastened the collar and brought it closer to the window for light. Etched into the metal in small block letters was a code. CRX 4921. No name, no contact. Just that. Malik grabbed his phone from the nightstand, opened a browser, and typed in the string. At first, nothing came up. But then, buried beneath search results for dog products and zip codes, a forum link caught his attention. He clicked. The forum was dated, barely functional, but a few posts mentioned something called the Canis Recovery Experiment. The more Malik read, the deeper the chill sank into his bones. CRX wasn't a shelter. It wasn't even part of the official canine registry. It was a privately funded behavioral facility, located 3 counties north, established under a federal pilot program for retraining military and police dogs that were deemed too unstable for adoption. The words retraining and unstable were repeated often, but beneath the surface was something else. Accusations, whistleblower testimonies, claims that the facility used electric prods, sensory deprivation, forced isolation, methods more akin to breaking a prisoner than rehabilitating an animal. Malik sat back, mind racing. "You were there," he said aloud, turning to look at Ranger. "They did that to you?" Ranger didn't respond, but his ears twitched at the tone of Malik's voice. He lay still but not entirely relaxed. His body seemed always partially alert, as if expecting an alarm to sound. Malik's eyes returned to the tag. If this collar was real, if the CRX number matched that facility, then someone had gone to great lengths to keep Ranger off the grid. Which begged the bigger question: How did a family dog, presumed dead, end up labeled as dangerous and dumped in a reconditioning center? Malik searched the CRX 4912 ID again, this time with more specific keywords. A link popped up to an archived veterinary report. Scanned PDF, low resolution. But the intake number matched German Shepherd, Panther. There was a hand-handed note at the bottom. Tag replacement requested, existing collar removed. Recommend behavior suppression protocol phase 2. Malik stared at the words, bile rising in his throat. They erased you, he said, voice cracking. They tried to erase you. His fingers tightened around the phone. He scrolled further and found a forum post from an ex-vet tech who'd worked at CRX. The comment was simple. Dogs weren't the problem. The people funded. Malik stood and began pacing the room, the adrenaline rushing now. This wasn't just about a lost pet. Someone had taken Ranger, branded him unstable, broken him, then dumped him, and that someone had access to files, to erasure protocols. Malik's instincts kicked in. He'd been a detective for 6 years before burning out. He knew cover-ups when he saw them. He looked at Ranger again, his old friend, his childhood shadow, now reduced to this trembling shell with haunted eyes, and the anger started to eclipse the confusion. They did this to you, he whispered. But why? Who would even care enough to? The motel room phone rang, shattering the silence. Malik jumped, eyes darting to the receiver. No one but the motel clerk, and he hadn't given his real name. He hesitated, picked it up. Hello? A pause, then a click. Silence. No voice, no sound, just the hum of the line. Then it went dead. Malik stared at the receiver in his hand. Shit, he breathed. He turned back toward Ranger, only to find the dog staring intently at the door. Ears up, body tense. A low growl built in his throat. Malik's pulse surged. Something wasn't right. He dropped the receiver, moved quietly to the door, and peered through the peephole. The parking lot looked empty, but across the lot near the edge of the woods a dark sedan idled. Lights off, windows tinted, too still, too intentional. Malik stepped back from the door slowly. His mind was already moving. This wasn't coincidence. Someone was watching. Maybe they'd been watching since the moment he picked Ranger off that road. Maybe the dog wasn't supposed to be found. Maybe he was never supposed to come back at all. The room had gone still again after the phone call. But the silence wasn't the kind that brought peace. It had a pulse, a rhythm, a weight that settled over Malik's chest and refused to lift. He sat near Ranger, running his hand down the dog's neck, feeling the coiled tension beneath the fur. Ranger wasn't relaxed. He was waiting, alert, listening. Malik's eyes drifted toward the door again, but the parking lot was now empty. The sedan had vanished, like it had never been there. Still, something in the air had changed. Malik stood and began packing his bag slowly, not out of urgency, but because his instincts told him that this motel room had already outlived its safety. He paused at the sound of a door down the hall slamming shut, waited, then zipped the duffel. Just as he reached for Ranger's leash, a knock came from the wooden door. 3 short, sharp raps. Malik barely registered it before Ranger reacted like he'd been electrocuted. The dog shot to his feet, growling deep from the chest. His eyes locked on the door as though it were a battlefield. The growl grew into a snarl, loud and raw. His hackles raised in a way Malik hadn't seen since they were kids and Ranger had chased off a fox from the backyard coop. Malik froze. The knock hadn't been threatening, just 3 calm, deliberate taps. But something about it had short-circuited Ranger's mind. Ranger, Malik said cautiously. It's okay, boy, hey. But the dog didn't move. He was fixed in place, vibrating with alertness like a tripwire waiting to snap. Malik's heart pounded. That knock, it sounded exactly like the one from the old home videos his dad used to record. In one of the last clips, taken just a few days before the fire, Malik's father had knocked on the side door to get Ranger's attention before giving him a treat. 3 knocks. Always 3, always the same rhythm. You remember that, Thorley? Captured the chill crawling up his spine. You remember that? He backed away from the door slowly and went to the window. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no voices, no footsteps retreating. Nothing. He waited until Ranger settled, though his body stayed rigid, and then led him out the back exit toward the truck. It was time to leave. He needed answers, not theories, facts. He didn't drive to the county vet or a shelter. He drove to where it all started. The lot where the Carter family home used to stand. The town had fenced it off years ago, citing safety concerns about the ruined foundation and debris. But Malik parked a block away and walked Ranger along the side road that wound behind the neighborhood. The air smelled like pine and dust, and time didn't seem to have passed here. The fence was rusted, the weeds were tall, but the shape of the property was the same. As they stepped through a break in the fence, Ranger slowed, then stopped. His body language changed, cautious, almost reverent. He sniffed the earth, the porch remained. Then, like muscle memory taking over, he turned toward the skeletal remains of the front steps and sat quietly, as if he'd never left. Malik watched him, unable to move. The porch had been rebuilt in Malik's dreams too many times. And now, seeing Ranger sit on those steps again, it wasn't nostalgia, it was eerie. Like the dog had walked back into his own memory. As Malik approached, he heard the gravel crunch behind him and turned to see a figure approaching slowly. An old woman in a faded floral dress, walking with a cane. Her face was lined with years, her eyes sharp despite the softness of her voice. "You the Carter boy?" she asked. Malik nodded, surprised. "Yes, ma'am, Malik Carter." She didn't smile, but she stepped closer, eyeing the dog. "That him?" she asked. "The one that used to sit out here every night?" Malik's breath caught. "You saw him?" "Saw him for weeks after the fire," she said, settling herself on a nearby stone. "Every night. 8 o'clock sharp. He'd show up, sit right there on the top step. Wouldn't move. Rain or shine." Malik knelt beside Ranger, who hadn't taken his eyes off the yard. "I thought he died in the fire, that's what they told me." "That's what everyone thought," the woman said. "But not me. I saw him, he was real thin, skittish. But he came back, like he was waiting for somebody to come out that door." Malik felt a lump forming in his throat. "Then what happened?" The old woman sighed. "A car came, big black thing, no plates. Parked right across the road. 2 men got out. I thought they were animal control. But they didn't knock, didn't talk, just walked up and took him, no leash. Just picked him up and carried him off like a sack of potatoes. He didn't bark, didn't fight, just looked back at the porch one last time." Malik was silent for a long moment. Ranger hadn't moved. The image was too much. The thought of a loyal dog returning every night, hoping his family would come out the door, and then being taken without explanation, burned behind Malik's eyes. "Do you remember the date?" he asked finally. The woman nodded. "It was the night after your folks' funeral, June 3rd. Same time, 8 o'clock. That date rang like a bell in Malik's skull. He remembered his uncle leaving town that morning, saying he had errands in Charleston. The timelines matched too cleanly. The darkness wasn't just in the past, it had a name, and it might not be buried yet. Malik thanked the woman and guided Ranger back to the truck. But the dog paused one last time at the edge of the porch. His gaze lingered on the doorway, ears perked, chest still. Then he turned back, climbed into the passenger seat, and lay down with a sigh that sounded too human. Malik pulled onto the road with the old house shrinking behind him in the rearview mirror. But the questions were getting louder. Ranger hadn't died. Ranger had remembered. And now Malik needed to know who had wanted the world to forget. Back in his truck, Malik sat in silence, watching the wipers drag across the windshield in a steady rhythm. But he wasn't seeing the road. His thoughts were spinning faster than his engine. The old woman's words echoed like a haunting loop in his head. They just picked him up and carried him off like a sack of potatoes. That image of Ranger being taken, docile, confused, eyes locked on a door that would never open again, dug into something deep and raw inside Nathan. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was betrayal, and betrayal left trails. Malik opened his laptop, the one he'd barely touched in weeks, and connected to the motel's shaky Wi-Fi. He began searching state databases, vet records, and intake logs again. But this time he went deeper. He pulled up the original PDF he had found days earlier. Intake number through a reverse lookup system meant for registered animal ownership transfers. It was supposed to be encrypted for privacy, but Malik still had some tools left from his time on the force. The first hit came fast. The ownership log showed the last known custodian of the dog, labeled CRX 49212, was a company called Ashridge Holding Group, LLC. No logo, no phone number, Just a P.O. box registered 2 towns over. Malik narrowed his eyes. Ashridge. That name wasn't random. His cousin Darius had once mentioned it over drinks, called it his quiet nest egg, a real estate investment vehicle passed down from some smart lawyers after Malik's parents died. Back then, Malik hadn't thought much of it. He was drowning in loss, fresh out of college, and Darius had stepped in to help settle things on behalf of the family. Now it felt like something else. Malik searched the state's business registration system and found the filing info. Ashridge Holding Group was legally founded just 3 months after the fire. The registered agent? Darius R. Morgan, the same Darius who'd signed the probate documents that removed Malik as the executor of his parents' estate due to inability to be present. The documents had been processed while Malik was still in therapy for survivor's guilt in Atlanta. Malik exhaled slowly. His cousin hadn't just inherited land. He'd built a wall of paperwork to erase Malik from the picture entirely. And now, somehow, the same Aliso held ownership over the intake number that belonged to a dog everyone thought had perished in that same fire. It was too clean, too controlled. He needed more. He needed someone who'd been inside CRX. He remembered a forum post from earlier, one left by a former vet tech who claimed to have worked at the behavioral facility before it was shut down. The username was K9 Truth, and the post ended with a cryptic line, "If you ever had a dog there, email me. You deserve to know." Malik pulled the email address and typed out a short, direct message. Subject, CRX49. He disappeared years ago and resurfaced wearing your tag. I need to know what was done to him. He sent the message and waited. Minutes passed, then 30, an hour. The motel clock ticked toward 11 a.m. Malik began to lose hope. Just as he started to close his laptop, the reply came in. One line, meet me, no paper trail, no names. 2 p.m. Lake Chiswell, East Dock. The lake was 40 minutes out. Malik loaded Ranger into the truck, heart hammer. The dog seemed calmer now, almost serene, but every time Malik looked at him, he saw layers of silence stacked like bricks. Years of waiting, enduring, surviving. Lake Chiswell was deserted when they arrived. It was cloudy, wind cutting across the water with a low whistle. Malik parked near the east dock and stepped out. Ranger stayed close, his step slow but deliberate. A figure emerged from the trail leading down from the parking lot. Mid-30s, hoodie up, sunglasses, cautious movements. They didn't shake hands. The man glanced at Ranger and stopped. It's him, he said under his breath. Damn. I never thought I'd see that one again. Malik nodded. Tell me everything. The man looked around. Name's Travis. I was a behavioral assistant at CRX for about a year before the place got shut down. Most of us signed NDAs. But some things, you can't forget. Malik held up his phone. Off. No recordings. Travis smirked. So, that dog, CRX 4912, we called him Echo because he never barked, never made a sound. But he was different. Wouldn't respond to conditioning. Wouldn't eat for days after they tried phase 2. Malik's throat tightened. What's phase 2? Travis looked at him like he was sure he didn't want the answer. Electric reinforcement. It's supposed to overwrite learned associations. Basically burn new behavior into the brain by force. But your dog? Every time we ran the protocol, he froze when we said your name. Malik's heart stopped. My name? Yeah, Travis continued. Eyes fixed on Ranger. One of the handlers messed up. Read an old intake note out loud, something about Malik Carter, prior owner. The second he heard it, the dog stopped responding. Wouldn't move. Wouldn't comply. Wouldn't even look at us. We tried again a week later. Same result. He wasn't reacting out of fear. He was remembering. And CRX? They didn't like memory. Malik knelt beside Ranger, who sat beside him like a statue. Why didn't you tell someone? Shut the place down? I tried, Travis said, voice bitter. They told me he was flagged for termination. But the next day he was gone, transferred supposedly. I heard rumors that one of the funders took him out themselves. Special interest case. Big money. Then the whole center got raided 6 months later. And the funders? Malik asked. Name anyone. Travis hesitated. Then, Ashridge. Same name on the funding paperwork, private equity shell, but some local family was behind it. Malik stood up slowly, his jaw clenched. Morgan, could be, ladies' rights back. And someone paid damn good money to make sure of it. Malik glanced at Ranger, but he did remember. Yeah, Travis whispered. He did, that's why he survived. A gust of wind blew across the lake, scattering dead leaves across the dock. Malik didn't speak again. He just turned back toward the truck, Ranger at his side, and the weight of too many buried truths pressing down on his shoulders. Whatever Darius was hiding, it was tied to a dog who wouldn't forget the name of a boy who never stopped loving him. And now, Malik wasn't just chasing closure. He was chasing the man who tried to erase them both. The wind had picked up by the time Malik and Ranger returned to town, dry leaves tumbling across the pavement like whispers trying to outrun the truth. Malik didn't speak as he drove, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with every mile. Jaw locked, mind spinning through the conversation at Lake Chiswell like a crime scene he couldn't stop replaying. Darius Morgan, Ashridge Holdings, CRX 4-9 holding, and now, electricity and memory suppression. But despite it all, the moment that echoed loudest in Malik's mind was the image of Ranger freezing every time someone said his name. That wasn't instinct. That was love fighting to survive torture. That was loyalty refusing to be rewritten. Malik pulled onto the cracked dirt path that led to what remained of the Carter family property. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy in uneven streaks, casting the yard in a patchwork of gold and shadow. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the surroundings with a quiet intensity. Malik parked and stepped out, grabbing a small handspade from the truck bed, not because he expected to use it, but because he'd learned that when following a trail buried this deep, you needed to be ready for anything. Ranger didn't wait for instructions. As soon as his paws hit the ground, he moved with purpose. Not running, not sniffing blindly. He moved like a dog on a mission that had been burning in his muscles for years. He led Malik around the side of the collapsed house frame, past the old water pump and the overgrown patch that used to be a vegetable garden. Then he stopped. Behind the house, nestled between two moss-covered tree stumps, stood an old white oak tree, its bark peeling, roots coiling like veins above the soil. Ranger approached it slowly, sniffed the base, then sat. Not alert, not anxious, just resolute. Malik watched him, heart pounding. "Is this it?" he asked under his breath. Ranger didn't respond, but he didn't move either. Malik knelt at the tree's base and ran his fingers over the ground. The soil was loose, softer than the dry clay nearby. He set the spade down and began digging with his hands, pushing aside leaves, stones, and damp earth until something hard tapped against his knuckles. A box, small, metal rusted around the edges but intact. It was wrapped in what looked like an old t-shirt, faded and brittle, the kind his father used to wear when working in the shed. Malik's breath caught. He pulled the box free and sat back on his heels. Ranger didn't move, just watched, waiting. The lid creaked open reluctantly, revealing a Ziploc bag. Inside, a dusty USB drive, a folded scrap of paper, and a brass key Malik didn't recognize. The paper was brittle, folded multiple times, but the ink was still legible. For him, "If I don't make it," no nade, no date, just that single, chilling sentence written in his father's distinct, left-handed. Malik stared at the USB. Whatever it contained had been hidden for nearly 2 decades. Hidden by a man who apparently knew the fire wasn't accidental. Malik slipped it into his pocket and turned to Ranger. "You remembered this," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You remembered where he left it." Ranger didn't wag his tail, didn't bark. He just turned and walked back toward the house's skeletal remains, like his part in this moment was done. Back at the motel, Malik plugged the USB into his laptop with trembling fingers. The screen flickered. A single video file loaded. No title, just a timestamp, June 2nd, 2008, 2:16 AY. The night of the fire. Malik double-clicked. The footage was grainy, likely taken from a security camera his father had installed in the workshop. The feed showed the side of the house, the kitchen entrance, the propane tanks, and the back porch. For a long moment there was nothing, just crickets and trees swaying under the wind. Then movement. A figure entered the frame from the right. Male, medium build, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. No visible face. He moved quickly, deliberately, carrying a metal gas can. Malik's stomach twisted, The man bent down near the propane tanks and poured a long stream of liquid across the grass, tracing a line along the house's foundation, up the wooden stairs, and all the way to the back door. He repeated the process on the opposite side. Then he stepped back and pulled out a lighter. He lit a match. As flames burst into existence, the camera caught a second figure, smaller, four-legged, barreling toward the man. It was Ranger. Younger, unscarred, but unmistakable. He launched himself at the man with a snarl, teeth flashing. The man fell, dropped the can, and scrambled up, kicking the dog once, hard but not enough to stop him. Ranger barked loud and sharp, then turned and ran toward the house. He disappeared inside. 30 seconds passed, then the door opened again, this time with Ranger dragging something behind him, a limp arm, a body. Malik's father, his head lolled to the side, unconscious or already gone. Ranger pulled with every muscle in his frame, legs slipping on the wet grass, eyes wild with desperation. He got halfway down the porch stairs before the flames caught. The propane tank exploded, the screen filled with light, and then static. Malik stared at the laptop, unable to breathe. His father hadn't died asleep in his bed. He'd been alive when the fire started. And Ranger had tried to save him. Malik looked down at the dog now sleeping near the heater, his breathing shallow but steady, unaware that the worst night of their lives had just been replayed. A single tear slid down Malik's cheek as he reached for the laptop's pause button. He didn't know who the man in the hoodie was yet, but he had a lead. Malik stared at the frozen frame on his laptop, eyes locked on the man in the hoodie just before the flames erupted. Though the resolution was poor and the angle too wide to make out facial features, there was something about the way the figure moved, something familiar and rehearsed, like someone who had been there before. Malik leaned closer and scrubbed through the footage again, frame by frame, until something caught his eye, a glint of metal under the hood, a pendant. It swayed for just a moment when the man knelt to pour gasoline, catching the light, a silver cross with a broken edge. Malik's heart dropped. That necklace wasn't just familiar, it was specific. It had belonged to Reverend Ellis Price, his father's best friend since childhood, and the current pastor of New Dominion Baptist Church. Malik had seen that cross up close 1,000 times, had held it once as a child when Ellis let him play with it after Sunday service. Worn down from decades of prayer, the Reverend used to say, except it hadn't been worn, it had been snapped, a break right through the stem. An accident from a fall in the garden his father had helped him build. The fracture had made it one of a kind. Malik felt bile rise in his throat. He pushed away from the desk and began pacing. Reverend Ellis had spoken at his father's funeral, had held Malik's hand and wept, had told the town it was a tragedy no God could explain. Now he was running for state senate on a platform of faith and reform. Malik grabbed the flash drive from the laptop and slid it into his jacket pocket. If this man had orchestrated the fire, had stood on that lawn with a gas can and a lighter, then every Sunday sermon and every handshake since had been a lie. He pulled up the Reverend's campaign website. There it was, his face aged but polished, framed by soft lighting and bold text. Ellis Price, a shepherd for the people. Malik snorted bitterly, then clicked into the biography. Toward the bottom he found a campaign office address, along with a list of board members and sponsors. Half the names were familiar, donors, local business owners, but one in particular stood out. Darius R. Morgan. Malik's cousin wasn't just profiting from family land. He was funding the man who'd burned it down. He slammed the laptop shut and stood, but just as he turned to call Ranger, his phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize lit up the screen. He hesitated, then answered. Malik Carter? The voice was male, older. Careful. Who is this? Malik asked. Someone who used to work in records at CRX? I heard you've been asking questions. Got a call from a friend, said you're looking for the truth about a shepherd. Thought I'd return the favor. Malik's pulse quickened. I emailed you something, the man said. I had to clean out my desk fast when they shut the place down. Found some stuff that never made it into the logs. Figured someone should have it. The line went dead before Malik could ask anything else. Seconds later, an email arrived. No subject, one attachment. A photo scan labeled CRX_inventory_ranger_confidential. Malik opened it and stared. The image showed Ranger, younger and leaner, inside a steel bar kennel surrounded by pinewood fencing. There was no bedding, no food bowl, just a rusted water bucket and chains bolted into the concrete. In the corner of the photo, a sign hung on the fencing, Camp Harriston Wildlife Conditioning Grounds. Malik zoomed in. At first glance, it looked like a normal name, perhaps another behavioral facility. But then he saw the shadowy shapes stacked behind the fencing. Crates, blood-stained tarps, and what appeared to be mounted animal heads. The conditioning ground wasn't for training. It was for hunting. Ranger hadn't just been suppressed, he'd been held in a place that trafficked wildlife under the guise of behavior correction. Malik remembered something Travis had mentioned. A funder took him out themselves. If that funder had been connected to a place like this, then Ranger's suffering wasn't just collateral damage. It was intentional. He printed the photo, grabbed his keys, and called Ranger to the door. The dog moved slower now, but his steps were steady, his gaze sharp. Malik held up the photo. "This place, do you remember it?" Ranger sniffed the paper, then backed away with a low growl vibrating through his chest. It was answer enough. They drove to the address listed under the old facility's permit, an unmarked lot outside of Harriston County, down a gravel road that seemed to lead nowhere. The gate was locked with chains, but the fence was half collapsed and Malik climbed over, Ranger following silently through a gap. The ground was soft and littered with tire tracks, but the buildings looked abandoned. Malik stepped inside the main shed. The smell hit first, metallic, rotting, mixed with bleach. The walls were lined with cages, empty now, but their scratches and claw marks still painted the story of what had happened there. Ranger moved ahead, nose down, ears up. He led Malik to a metal cabinet tucked behind a torn curtain. The lock had been snapped, inside were files, water-damaged but legible. Malik flipped through them quickly. Each one documented a different dog posts, intake dates, notes on behavior. Then he saw it. CRX 4912. Under remarks, someone had scribbled, "Too many variables. Memory anchors remain. Will not submit. Relocate before termination notice is processed." Malik shoved the file into his bag and turned to leave. As he stepped outside, the setting sun cast the shed's shadow long and sharp across the lot, stretching like a finger toward the tree line. He followed Ranger around the building, toward the back where a fire pit had been built out of stone. Beside it, buried beneath a tarp weighed down by bricks, was a small pile of scorched documents. Malik knelt and brushed ash from the top page. He recognized the header, Ashridge Holdings Property Transfer Summary. The first listed parcel, Carter Residence, 14.2 acres. The buyer, Ellis Price Foundation Trust. Malik stood slowly, staring at the ashes, then back at Ranger. The pastor hadn't just burned his home, he'd bought it afterward through a shell trust, buried it under a network of LLCs, then sold it back to the county after it was deemed unusable, which meant every step, the fire, the dog's disappearance, the land transfer, had been planned, coordinated, executed like a cover-up. And Ellis hadn't done it alone. Malik didn't sleep that night. He sat at the edge of the motel bed with the box of scorched documents spread across the blanket, like bones unearthed from a grave. The names, the signatures, the transfer dates, they all pointed in the same direction. Betrayal. His father's land had been stolen, his dog erased, and the man who'd baptized him as a child had lit the map. But what kept Malik's eyes open wasn't just the weight of what had been done. It was the weight of what was still being protected. He knew the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it would become. He had already crossed lines, and someone out there knew it. By morning, he had a plan. He would drive to the county clerk's office to request sealed records related to the Ashridge Trust, and from there track financial transactions. If Ellis Price had bought the land through shell accounts, there had to be a trail of money. People didn't commit arson and animal cruelty to get rich. They did it to bury secrets. He loaded Ranger into the truck, triple-checked his tires, and hit the road. The morning fog was thick, rolling low across the pavement, and the truck's heater hummed as the silence between them stretched thin. Malik glanced at Ranger. "We're getting close. You ready?" Ranger, curled in the seat, didn't lift his head, but his ears twitched at the sound of Malik's voice. Halfway down Highway 72, Malik noticed something strange. The brakes felt off. Not soft exactly, but delayed just a split second longer than they should have been. He pressed again, slower this time, and the pedal dipped farther than normal. "No," he muttered. "Not today." He pulled over onto the shoulder, heart pounding. As soon as he stopped, Ranger sat up sharply, nose pressed against the vent. Then he growled, short, urgent. Malik got out, walked around to the front wheel, and crouched low. That's when he saw it. A dark, slick stain trailing from the wheel housing to the gravel below. Fresh. He touched it with a gloved finger and held it up. The smell was sharp and unmistakable. Brake fluid mixed with synthetic oil. Someone had tampered with his system. He opened the hood, checked the reservoir. Empty. Bone dry. His heart raced. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This was a message. He reached back into the cab, pulled his dashcam from the windshield mount, and rewound the footage. A few minutes of static, trees, road. Then, at 6:08 a.m., a figure appeared near the truck. The image was blurry, but enough light from the motel sign had caught the outline. A man in uniform. Not Ellis, not Darius. This man wore a badge, Manid's pocket. It wasn't clear, but he could make out the shape of a shoulder patch and a utility belt. Then the figure turned just slightly, glancing toward the camera, his face mostly shadowed, but one feature stood out. A scar cutting diagonally across the bridge of the nose. Malik's stomach twisted. He knew that scar. It belonged to Deputy Chief Nolan Creeley, the current second-in-command at the Morrow County Sheriff's Office, and the same man who had signed the 2008 death certification form for 1 CRX 4912, marked deceased due to complications from trauma, with no body recovered. Malik closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, fury rising like steam. The web was tightening. It wasn't just a few corrupt officials anymore. It was law enforcement. It was system. And someone had decided Malik had come too close. He picked up his phone and dialed a former colleague from his detective days, Layla Monroe, now working internal affairs in Charleston. She answered on the second ring. "Carter, you're a ghost. What's going on?" "I need a favor," Malik said, eyes locked on the image of Creeley frozen on his dashcam screen. "And I need you to trust me." He laid out the details. The dog, the property, the fire, the pastor, the company, the facility, and now the sabotage. Layla didn't interrupt. When he finished, there was a pause. "You're telling me you have a dashcam video of an active deputy chief tampering with your vehicle?" "Clear enough to raise hell," Malik said. "But not enough for court." "Send me what you have," she said. "I'll run the batch number. Meanwhile, watch your back. If they're messing with your brakes, they're not just trying to scare you." Malik ended the call, uploaded the video to encrypted cloud storage, and reattached the camera. He didn't want to drive the truck anymore, but with Ranger in tow and no rental options nearby, he had no choice. He moved cautiously, coasting at slow speeds, relying more on downshifting than brakes. He made it to the county clerk's office by noon and walked straight to the public record terminal. As he sifted through microfilm files, his mind refused to settle. Creeley's face kept flashing behind his eyes, along with the fake death certificate. Why go that far? Why kill off a dog on paper, unless that dog had witnessed something no one wanted remembered? The answer came faster than he expected. In a dusty folder labeled Ashridge/Trust Consolidation 2009, Malik found a printed map. It showed the boundaries of multiple properties acquired by the holding group that year. Included among them was a section labeled Parcel 7, Carter Woodland. Underneath the parcel ID was a handwritten note in red ink. Per price, clear for pasture development. Malik froze. Price had ordered the clearing of his father's workshop less than a year after the fire. That land hadn't just been stolen, it had been sterilized, sanitized, erased, and the only one who tried to stop it, Ranger, had been sent away, silenced, deemed too broken for society. Except, he hadn't broken. He had waited. And now he had warned. Malik turned to leave, but as he stepped outside, his phone buzzed again. This time it was an anonymous number. He hesitated, then picked up. A mechanical voice filtered through, distorted and cold. "You should have stayed away, Carter. Some things are bigger than dogs and dead men." Malik's knuckles tightened around the phone. "Who is this?" The line clicked dead. He looked down at Ranger, who stood by the truck door, ears twitching, eyes scanning the parking lot. They weren't alone anymore. The sky had dimmed into an overcast gray as Malik guided the truck back toward the outskirts of town, a persistent tension coiling in his gut like storm pressure about to break. Ranger sat quietly in the passenger seat, but his eyes were alert, glancing toward every car they passed, every alley they rolled by, as if he too sensed the invisible net tightening around them. Malik's phone buzzed twice in rapid succession. He pulled it from his pocket and unlocked the screen, expecting a message from Layla or possibly a campaign update from Price's office if he was lucky. But what loaded was neither. A single text with no contact name, an image, then a line of text. He tapped the photo first and felt his breath catch. Once the dog hand flicked the ready one up and opened the kennel, with chain link walls and concrete floor, the timestamp was current. Within the last hour. Malik turned instantly toward the dog next to him, who remained calm, breathing evenly. He looked back at the photo. It was real, but it wasn't now. It had to be old. But then, under the photo, the message arrived. This time, don't let him slip away again. A language Malik recognized only because of the small foster family who had taken him in briefly after the fire. Specifically, his father's longtime friend and business partner, Mr. Bao, who had passed a few years back. But Mr. Bao had a son. And that son, Malik hadn't thought of Kien in years, but now the language felt like a signature, like a whisper from the past thrown across decades to say, I still know you. Malik's fingers trembled slightly as he typed back, Where did you get this photo? No reply. He set the phone down, hands tightening on the wheel. Ranger whined softly and placed his paw on Malik's leg, grounding him. I'm not going to lose you, Malik muttered, more to himself than to the dog again. They drove in silence until the next light, where a pedestrian passed in front of the truck. The man looked ordinary, a blue windbreaker jeans, a ball cap pulled low, but as he walked by, Ranger jolted. His entire posture shifted, nose pressed to the cracked window, ears rigid. Then the growl came, low, guttural, not aggressive but unmistakably disturbed. What is it? Malik asked, eyes snapping to the man, but the figure didn't turn. He simply continued walking, then stepped into a waiting black SUV parked just around the corner. As it pulled away, the air inside the truck changed. Ranger sat back, his chest rising and falling rapidly, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. You know that smell? Malik asked, but he already felt the answer settling in. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a tiny cologne sampler he'd found during his cleanup of his mother's belongings. A small glass vial labeled sandalwood. He uncapped it. Before he even brought it close, Ranger snarled. The reaction was immediate, violent. He reared back, barked sharply, and clawed at the passenger door, like he needed to escape. Malik screwed the cap on fast, heart hammering. Okay, easy. He dropped the vial back in the glove box and stared at Ranger, who now sat trembling, his whole body humming with confusion and fear. Where have you smelled that before? Malik whispered. He closed his eyes and forced his memory to pull up anything linked to sandalwood. Anything at all. Then he saw it. A figure from his early teens standing in the hallway of the group home after the fire, arms folded, stern gaze fixed on him with false sympathy. His foster father at the time, Frederick Langston. Not official family but appointed guardian when no next of kin stepped forward. The man had worn expensive suits and always that cologne. Strong, sweet, layered with something bitter underneath. Malik had hated it. Langston had spoken in warm tones, offered kindness in public, but behind closed doors he had been cold, calculating, more interested in Malik's father's land than Malik himself. Years later, Malik had learned Langston had worked in private land acquisition, and now the smell on that man who passed the truck, the same cologne, and Ranger's reaction. It wasn't a coincidence. You're all connected, Malik murmured. Langston, Price, Darius, maybe even Creeley. He drove straight to the town library and parked outside. The building was nearly empty. He carried Ranger with him, despite the no pets sign, and set up in one of the private research booths. There, using one of the public access terminals, he began cross-referencing business filings, nonprofit donations, campaign contributors, and property transfers. Threads began to emerge. The Price Foundation, which had acquired the Carter property after the fire, had received a significant donation in 2010 from a group called Varden Holdings. Malik dug deeper. Varden's board members included Frederick Langston. Another name on the list? Kian Bao. His stomach twisted. The people who had reshaped his life, who had taken his father, his dog, and nearly his identity, had all been standing on the same scaffold. One name led to another. Ashridge Holdings had once merged with Varden for a short-term development project on wilderness retreats that conveniently aligned with the timeline of Camp Harriston. The hunting facility, the training ground, the lies. Malik leaned back and stared at the screen. Ranger had stopped shaking and now sat quietly at his feet, eyes fixed on the exit. Malik could feel the weight of something approaching. His phone buzzed again. Another message. This one without a photo. Just 4 words. Stop digging or else. Malik stood slowly, slipped the phone into his pocket and whispered to Ranger, "They're scared. That means we're close." Outside, thunder cracked low in the distance. The storm didn't arrive in rain but in movement. In the slow rotation of power, in the shift of attention, in the quiet unraveling of control that begins when truth is finally spoken aloud. Malik knew the moment to strike wasn't something to wait for. It had to be created. He sat in the back room of a diner just off Route 9, laptop open, Ranger curled by his feet like a silent sentinel. The air smelled of old coffee and fried grease, but Malik's focus was locked on the timeline editor in front of him. The footage from the USB, the grainy image of a hooded man pouring accelerant around his childhood home, was cued beside the dashcam clip of Deputy Creeley near Malik's truck, and then another. Still shots from Camp Harriston's hidden records, including the photo of Ranger in the kennel beneath the false training banner. Malik clicked merge. He added no voiceover, no dramatic music, just text. Clean, quiet captions. "What happened to me wasn't an accident," the first frame read. What happened to him was never supposed to be remembered. When the video finished rendering, he uploaded it. Not to his personal profile but through a secured burner account with no traceable name. Blasting it out simultaneously to multiple platforms. YouTube, Reddit, Twitter. A few closed watchdog forums. Within minutes, comments poured in. Within an hour, it had already been mirrored by 2 local journalists. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, an email landed in Malik's inbox from a DOJ field agent. "Mr. Carter, we'd like to speak to you in person." Malik didn't respond right away. He simply closed the laptop, looked at Ranger, and whispered, "They're listening now." Back in town, the ripple effect was immediate. Reverend Price's campaign was disabled by morning. Darius Morgan's name was scrubbed from Ashridge's public-facing document. Creeley had not been seen at the precinct since 8 a.m. But what mattered more than vanishing faces was what appeared. Declarations from former city employees, shelter workers, even a municipal accountant who provided Malik with copies of fraudulent land appraisals dating back to 2009. But amidst all the smoke and noise, there was still one thing missing. Absolute proof that Malik was the rightful heir to the Carter estate. The copies of the will filed with the county had all listed Darius as the executor, citing the original being lost in the fire. Malik had always accepted that, until now. Now he wasn't so sure. They had forged everything else. Why not that? The thought pressed harder as he sat alone in the remnants of the family home. A flashlight in one hand, the other brushing over the edges of the ruined wall frames. Ranger moved slowly through the skeleton of the house, not sniffing aimlessly but with purpose, with memory. He walked across the cracked floorboards into what had once been the living room, paused at the fireplace, then turned left toward the hallway. Malik followed, ducking under a collapsed beam. Ranger stopped at the old study door, or what was left of it, and placed his paw gently against the blackened wood. Malik's heart pounded. "This where he hid it?" he whispered. Ranger looked back at him and sat. Malik dropped to his knees and ran his fingers along the base of the wall. It looked like nothing, just charred plaster and soot. But the deeper he pressed, the more he noticed a change in texture, a hollow spot. He used a crowbar to wedge into the seam. With a groan, part of the wall peeled back, revealing a tiny compartment just large enough for a folder. Inside was a metal tin, scorched around the corners but intact. Malik opened it slowly. Inside, a single plastic sleeve protecting 3 pages, slightly yellowed but untouched by fire. Across the top, in his father's looping penmanship, "Last will and testament of..." Malik scanned the lines quickly. his eyes locking on the declaration naming him as sole heir, written months before the fire, notarized, signed. The witnesses were both deceased, but the document was legal, verifiable. It was never lost. It was hidden. On purpose, for protection. Malik leaned back on his heels and let the weight of the moment wash over him. The lies went deeper than he thought, but they had cracks now, and in those cracks light was starting to bleed through. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of every page. Then he texted Layla. "Found the original, it's real, let's talk." As he stood, Ranger nudged him softly with his snout and then, with a slow gait, returned to the doorway. Malik looked out over the remains of the home that had once defined his childhood, realizing this wasn't just a crime to expose, it was a life to reclaim. A noise broke the silence. A car door slamming shut down the road. Malik stepped outside, shielding his eyes. An unmarked SUV had pulled into the driveway. Two figures stepped out, one in a dark suit, the other wearing a federal windbreaker. The DOJ had arrived faster than expected. Malik walked forward calmly, documents in hand, Ranger at his side. The truth no longer a theory but a tangible thing that could no longer be burned or buried. One of the agents extended a hand. "Mr. Carter, I'm Agent Thorne. We've received affidavits. You're not alone in this anymore." Malik nodded. "Good. Because I think it's time we talk about what they did. To my family, to my dog." Thorne exchanged a look with the other agent. "We agree. But you should know, some of these names, they're tied to more than just your land. This might go federal." Malik exhaled. "Then let's go federal." He turned to Ranger and gave a slight nod. "We started this together. Let's finish it the same way." They stepped back into the SUV to head toward the regional office. But Malik couldn't shake the feeling that the biggest reveal was still ahead. Because somewhere out there, someone had known this was coming. The courtroom didn't buzz. It held its breath. Federal agents flanked the entrance. The judge's bench towered with impartial authority, and a gallery full of reporters, survivors, and former friends sat in stunned silence as names that once stood untouchable were called one by one. Ellis Price, charged with arson, conspiracy, and obstruction. Darius Morgan, indicted for fraud, racketeering, and forgery. Frederick Langston, exposed for laundering money through shell development funds tied to illicit wildlife grounds. And then there was Nolan Creeley, whose badge had once been a symbol of law in Morrow County, now a liability with inked charges for tampering with evidence and attempted vehicular homicide. The video Malik had released had started a storm, but what followed it, testimonies, recovered documents, forensic reviews, cemented it. They couldn't run, they couldn't spin it anymore, and they couldn't bury the one witness no one expected to still be alive. Ranger. The courtroom made no formal space for a dog, but exceptions were carved for stories like this. Malik entered each day with Ranger beside him, leash in hand. Not for control, but for presence. Ranger moved slower now, the arthritis in his hips making stairs a challenge. But he held his head high, his eyes steady. And when the prosecutor introduced the dog not just as a loyal companion, but as the only living being who survived the night that changed the Carter family forever, the entire gallery stood. Some cried, some applauded. Malik didn't move. He just placed a hand over Ranger's back and let the moment speak for both of them. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdicts came swiftly, guilty on all major counts, sentences pending. And though the justice system still had its cracks, something in Malik's chest settled that day. Not revenge, not victory, just stillness. Like silence after thunder. In the days that followed, the mayor declared a motion to rename a portion of the Carter property Ranger's Stand. The press tried to get Malik to speak. He declined all interviews. Not because he had nothing to say, but because what needed saying had already been lived. Instead, he returned to the land, not to the courthouse, not to the spotlight, but to the place it all began. He spent weeks restoring what was left of the house foundation, clearing vines, replacing broken boards, and cleaning out the old fireplace. Neighbors came by to help, one by one. No fanfare, just quiet hands working together to undo the forgetting. Spring came early that year. The trees bloomed in stubborn defiance of everything that had tried to wither them. And Malik found himself waking up before dawn, not to alarms or threats, but to the sound of birdsong filtering through open windows and the gentle rhythm of Ranger's breathing at the foot of the bed. He had built a new porch, wider, stronger, but in the same exact footprint as the one Ranger had waited on all those nights long ago. And every morning they would sit there, Malik with coffee, Ranger with his chin resting on Malik's bare feet, eyes half closed, body still. On the last morning it was no different. The sky was painted in that soft lavender haze only April could manage. The wind carried the scent of pine and the porch creaked like an old friend stretching its back. Malik didn't speak. He just sat, fingers absent-mindedly stroking Ranger's ears. The dog didn't stir. His breathing was shallow but even. His weight pressed slightly against Malik's thigh. And then, with the gentleness of someone who had finally found rest, Ranger exhaled a long, slow breath. His body relaxed, his eyes stayed closed. His tail didn't move. Malik didn't realize it at first. It wasn't dramatic. There was no final howl, no collapse, just stillness, pure, unshaken peace. He looked down and knew Ranger was gone. Gone not in pain, not in fear, but in the arms of the one he had waited for. Malik didn't cry. Not yet. He sat with him for hours, hand resting gently over that now motionless chest, letting the sun rise, letting the silence wrap around them like the blanket it had always been. He remembered the first time Ranger had waited here, a boy's dog on a broken porch, ears perked, eyes searching. That dog had waited 17 years for a boy who never came home. But this time the wait ended, and in that ending there was no more longing, only return. Malik buried Ranger beneath the white oak tree behind the house, in the exact spot where the tin of secrets had once been hidden. He carved no words into stone, just a single line on a wooden stake. He remembered. And every morning after, Malik still sat on that porch, coffee in hand, the silence beside him now filled with something sacred. Not grief, not even memory, just presence. Because some bonds don't vanish, they transform. And some love doesn't fade, it waits. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more cinematic stories inspired by true loyalty and untold truths. What moment hit you the hardest? Was it when Ranger pulled Malik's father from the fire? Or when he waited 17 years on that same porch? Tell us in the comments and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts.